Good morning. Today I'm going to deal with the reproductive system, the female reproductive system. We have dealt with the male reproductive system last time, and we will find that there are probably many similarities between male and female reproductive system because they have a common embryological origin. So the female reproductive system is about ovaries that produce the secondary oocytes and hormones. The ovaries are the counterparts of the testes, which again, they produce the germ cells, the gametes, with the sperms, and the hormones, the male hormones. But here we have the female hormones and the oocytes. And as I said, that both of them, they develop from the same area in the posterior abdominal wall in the lumbar region, and then they descend. The testis continues the descent into the scrotum. The ovaries, their descent will stop in the upper part of the pelvis. Then we have the uterine tubes, and these are for the fertilization and the transport of the fertilized ovum. Fertilization takes place in the tubes, in one part of the tube, which is called the ampulla of the tube. And then the uterus is for the implantation, for fetal development, for delivery, and for menstruation as well. Then the vagina is the passageway for birth, menstrual flow, and intercourse. And then we have the accessory glands. Here are the mammary glands, which produce the milk. So we will go to study them one by one. We will find what is their structure that contributes to their function. So the ovaries, they are small organs. They are the size of an almond, and they are located in the upper part of the pelvis, and they are the gonads of the female. Histologically, they are covered by a simple epithelium, the one layer of epithelium on the surface, and this is a continuation of the peritoneum. And then just deep to that, we have a tunica albuginea. Remember the tunica albuginea of the testis, that thick fibrous coat that covers the testis? Again, here we have the tunica albuginea. And then the remaining part of the ovary is divided into a cortical area and a medullary region. So in the cortex, which is just deep to the tunica albuginea, we will find that there are follicles in different stages of development. These follicles, they start as we have primordial follicles, and then they will form a primary follicle, secondary follicle, and a tertiary follicle, or the Graafian follicle before ovulation. In the medulla, there is a plexus of blood vessels and some nerves and lymphatics that supply the ovary. They are located in the medulla. So in the cortex, we will find these different stages of maturation of the oocyte. And then what happens after ovulation is that the remaining part of the follicle will change either into a corpus luteum, which is the yellow corpus, or to the white corpus albicans afterwards if fertilization does not take place. All these are present in the cortex. So as I said, that there are primordial follicles, and these contain oocytes. And these primordial follicles containing the oocytes, they are present at birth. So in the male, remember we mentioned about the spermatogonium, and then the primary spermatocyte, secondary spermatocyte, and then the sperm. Here, these are the development of the germ cells in the male. So the primary spermatocytes in the male, they develop at puberty. They start development at puberty. But in the female, actually, the primary oocytes here, which is like primary spermatocyte in the male, these primary oocytes, females are born with a full set of primary spermatocytes. And then during each menstrual cycle, or ovarian cycle in this case, there will be group of them, about 20 of them will start maturating. But they will have the full battery of these cells at the time of birth, unlike in the male, where these spermatogonia, they will start developing into primary spermatocytes only after puberty or at puberty. So we have primordial follicles that have primary spermatocytes, and then we have a primary follicle. A primary follicle will be surrounded by some cells which are called follicular cells. So it is not only the oocyte, but there will be a covering of cells and another structure which is called the zona pellucida. I will talk about it in a moment. And then instead of one layer of cells surrounding the oocyte, we will have multiple layers surrounding the oocyte, and then spaces will appear between these layers that surround the oocyte. So we will have a secondary follicle. So there are multiple follicular spaces like lakes filled with fluid, and then when all these lakes, of course, there will be enlargement of the follicle. It will become very large, about 1 centimeter in diameter, and there will be one space containing fluid, not multiple spaces or multiple lakes, and this is called the follicular space, and this is what we call the mature or the Graafian follicle. After the Dutch anatomist Graaf, it's called the Graafian follicle, or they call it tertiary follicle, as opposed to a primary, secondary, and tertiary follicle. And this is the follicle that is ready to ovulate. So during ovulation, what happens is that this is the part of the follicle that's going to be released. It consists of the oocytes, consisting of the oocyte, surrounded by a homogeneous layer of glycoprotein material. And this is the layer that has to be penetrated by the sperm. The acrosome of the sperm has to digest it and penetrate it. The zona pellucida, which is a homogeneous non-cellular layer of glycoprotein material. And then there are multiple layers of cells which constitute what we call the corona radiata. These are formed of the granulosa cells that form the wall of the follicle. Some of them are retained here, which are called the corona radiata. So the ovum that ovulates actually is not a single cell. It is the oocyte, which in this case now it will be the secondary oocyte, plus the zona pellucida, plus the corona radiata cells. This is what we call the ovum, and is going to be released from the tertiary follicle. So actually about 400 of these follicles will ovulate during the lifetime of a female, but we have about 40,000 of them, 40,000 at the time of menarche, or the beginning of the menstrual period. They will have 40,000 of these primary follicles, but of course not all of them will reach the maturity, because during each cycle 20 of them will start growing, but only one of them ovulate. The others that will not ovulate will become what we call atretic follicle and could be converted into fibrous tissue. So it's not only one that is developing during the cycle, but about 20 are developing, but only one reaches full maturity and will ovulate. The others become atretic. And this is to show you the comparison between the oogenesis in the male and female. Remember again here that this ovum, which contains the secondary oocyte, contains the haploid number of chromosomes, and the number will return to be a diploid number after fertilization. So they will contain a haploid from the sperm, haploid from the ovum or the oocyte. The zygote will have the diploid number of chromosomes. And here, if you compare it with spermatogenesis, there is no spermiogenesis. Like spermatogenesis, at the final stage of spermatogenesis, there are morphological changes in the shape of the cell. Here, there is no morphological changes in the shape of the cell. The only thing is that the cell is surrounded by this protective glycoprotein material, and these cells, the corona radiata cells, that again will provide for the nourishment of the ovum during its journey until it reaches the uterus. So back again, oocyte, zona pellucida, and corona radiata cells. These are going to be ovulated. So at ovulation, this is the ovary, and at ovulation, the ovum will go into the uterine tube. The uterine tube is about 4 inches, about 10 centimeters in length, and it extends into the uterus. It has the first part of it is funnel-shaped, the first part, and it's called the infundibulum. You can see it here. It has multiple finger-like projections. They can be seen grossly, and they are called fimbria. And one of them is attached to the ovary. So the ovum, when it is released, it will go into the infundibulum, and these fimbria are constantly moving, especially during at ovulation. So they will attract the ovum in, and the ovum will go into the infundibulum, and then it goes the other part of the tube here, which is called the ampulla, which is a distended part of the tube, the middle portion of the tube, and this is the place where fertilization takes place. So fertilization does not take place in the uterus, it takes place in the uterine tube. If these tubes are obstructed, if they have problem, then this will result in infertility, or it might result in what we call ectopic gestation, because the fertilized ovum will not be able, if the sperm passes, then the fertilized ovum and the zygote will not be able to pass to the uterus, so it will develop in the tube, and this will result in what we call tubal pregnancy. So fertilization takes place in the tube, specifically in the ampullary portion of the tube, and then we have the narrow portion, as its name indicates, the isthmus, the narrow portion of the tube that opens into the uterus. This is the narrowest part of the tube. Histologically speaking, therefore, we have a fibrous coat on the outside, and then we have a muscular coat, a muscularis layer. So we need this muscularis layer for peristalsis, to propagate the fertilized ovum, or if the ovum, if it is not fertilized. So there is a muscular coat, and then there are multiple folds here lined by simple squamous epithelium, which is also ciliated. So the cilia will help to move the ovum toward the uterus, as well as peristalsis. So we have a ciliated columnar epithelium. There are secretory cells that produce mucus as well. This is histologically speaking. Now, so the function of the uterine tube is that the fimbria will sweep the oocyte, as I mentioned, into the tube. Cilia and peristalsis will move it along, and the sperm reaches the oocyte in the ampulla, where fertilization takes place within 24 hours of ovulation, and then it will reach the uterus within a week. The uterus is the site of it's the site of implantation, development of the fetus, expulsion of the embryo, and it is the site of menstruation. And as you can see here, it's a pear-shaped organ. It has a fundus, which is a dome-shaped upper part. This is the part of the uterus that is above the level of entrance of the uterine tube. And then the body of the uterus, and then there is the region, narrow region, it's called the isthmus, and then the cervix. The cervix here, the cervix or cervical canal means that it's the neck of the uterus. And the cervix, it opens into the vagina. Actually, the cervix not only opens into the vagina, but it projects into the vagina. So it projects in the upper part of the vagina, the cervical part. And you can see here how thick the wall of the uterus is, because there are a lot of muscle fibers in the uterus, and this is of course required during delivery. It's not like what people long ago in the Middle Ages, they think that the fetus swims out. It's not like that. It is expelled out. It is the contraction of the uterus that will expel the fetus out. And this is, as I said, that the cervix of the uterus, the cervix, in fact, the cervix does not have smooth muscle fibers in its wall. It's mainly fibrous tissue covered by epithelium. So it doesn't take part in the expulsion. what happens is that the cervix, because it consists of fibrous tissue, so when the uterus contracts, it will enlarge the cervix, so that for the expulsion of the fetus. And because it projects, it not only opens, it projects into the vagina, so you can see it. If you look through the vagina by using a vaginal speculum, this is called vaginal speculum, Cascos speculum, and you can look at the cervix, and this is how a pap smear is taken from the cervix, because the cervix is a common site for tumor in the female. So they use this test. They take a smear to examine if there are abnormal cells in the cervix. The uterus, histologically speaking, it has three walls. There is the inner layer, which is called the endometrium, and then the myometrium and perimetrium. Remember, endocardium, myocardium. So we usually use these terms to express the names of the layers. So the endometrium here is a simple squamous epithelium. Simple columnar epithelium. It is simple columnar epithelium. And there below the epithelium, there is a stroma of connective tissue. And then during each menstrual cycle, there are glands. These are, first of all, these glands are short, they are tubular, and then in the second part of the cycle, as we will see in a moment, the glands will become coiled, will become elongated. So you see them here, they are coiled glands. You cannot see a simple tube like this one. So we have the endothelium, and then below that is the layer of connective tissue that is divided into two parts. The first part here, which is just beneath the endothelium, is called the stratum functionalis. This is the stratum functionalis, and you can see that the stratum functionalis increases in size during the menstrual cycle. But there is a small part of it which is very close to the myometrium, which is called the stratum basalis. The stratum basalis remains there. It doesn't shed during menstruation, and it helps building up the stratum functionalis during the second menstrual cycle. So we have functionalis, which contains these glands. These glands, they produce mucus, and in the second part of the cycle, they will start producing glycogen. They store glycogen, which is a ready store of energy for the fertilized ovum. So that's why they need to develop. And then we have the myometrium, which is very thick layer, different directions of muscle fibers, 3 layers of smooth muscle, and then the perimetrium, which is connective tissue, the visceral peritoneum. So the monthly cycle or reproductive cycle, it's a monthly cycle. Actually, it's 28-day cycle of changes in the ovary and the uterus. So we have 2 cycles, ovarian cycle and uterine cycle. And this is controlled by hormones. Many of them you are familiar with. The main control is the hypothalamus, as you can see here. The hypothalamus produces gonadotrophic releasing hormone, and this will act on the anterior pituitary to produce follicular stimulating and luteinizing hormones. And the follicular stimulating hormone, as its name in the female, as its name indicates, in the female, it will stimulate the formation of the follicle here. And then there will be a surge of luteinizing hormone at day 14 of the cycle, where ovulation will take place. And so the second part of the ovarian cycle, which is the luteal phase, is mainly under the control of the luteinizing hormone. The luteinizing hormone will control the functions of the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum is what remains of the follicle. So the follicle will eject the ovum, but the remaining cells in the follicle will form the corpus luteum, and this will continue to produce estrogen, progesterone, inhibin. They contain a lot of fat inside the cells, so they look yellowish in color. That's why they are called the corpus luteum. If fertilization does not take place then they will degenerate into fibrous tissue and are called corpus albicans, white, the white body, okay? But if fertilization takes place, then the zygote will produce a hormone which is called chorionic gonadotrophin, and this hormone will maintain the function of the corpus luteum in that case, and the corpus luteum will become the corpus luteum of pregnancy. Now if you look here at the uterine cycle, this is the uterine phase, the uterine side, you will find that it consists of days of menstruation, which are 5 days of menstruation, and it's very important here to understand that the cycle starts with the first day of bleeding. It's not at the end of the bleeding. The cycle starts from the first day of bleeding. So when you are asking a patient to calculate her pregnancy, for example, ask her about what is your last menstrual period, you should make it clear that when was the last time that you had bleeding, not when your bleeding stopped. Okay, so the cycle starts with the beginning of the bleeding, because the days afterwards are so variable and depending. Sometimes it's 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, maybe a week of bleeding, but you have to ask about the first day of bleeding. That will be the count for the menstrual cycle, and then it will be followed by proliferative phase. So during the proliferative phase, it is the endometrium. Now there are changes at the same time taking place in the endometrium, as well as the changes that are taking place in the ovary. In the endometrium, what happens is the stratum basalis, that layer that did not shed during menstruation, will start building up again. Will start building the stratum functionalis. So you can see here that there will be proliferation of blood vessels, the glands will be formed, and the thickness of the endometrium will increases until the day of ovulation. And then under the effect here, the second part of it is the secretory phase, where there will be secretion or production of glycogen, as I mentioned, which will be a ready source of energy for the fertilized ovum. The glands will become coiled, tortuous. The arteries and veins, there are a lot of blood vessels here. This is called the secretory phase, and it starts from day 14 or day 15, continues until day 28. What happens at that time is that there will be a drop of progesterone, because the corpus luteum will not be maintained. If fertilization does not take place, then the corpus luteum cannot be maintained, and so the progesterone level will decrease here, and this will result in vasoconstriction of these vessels. They will constrict, and as they constrict, this results in reduced blood supply, ischemia, and a process which is more or less similar to infarction. So this part of the endometrium will die and shed out, but the stratum basalis does not. The arteries of the stratum basalis, they do not undergo spasm like the arteries that supply the stratum functionalis. So this is more physiology about the control of the ovarian cycle. So the follicular phase is the primordial follicle matures from a Graafian follicle, as I mentioned, in 14 days. This is under the effect, as you can see here, follicular stimulating hormone will control it, and then this, as the follicle is growing, the follicular cells are producing estrogen, so the estrogen will enlarge until it reaches the level where it's going to trigger the luteinizing hormone. And it is at that time when the highest level of luteinizing hormone reaches from the pituitary under effect of high level of estrogen from the ovary, then ovulation of the Graafian follicle will take place. The secondary oocyte is expelled from the Graafian follicle, and then we have the luteal phase. The remaining Graafian follicle will form the corpus luteum, and if no fertilization, it degenerates, as I mentioned, and forms corpus albicans. If fertilization takes place, then the developing embryo will form chorionic gonadotrophin, which maintains the health of the corpus luteum. In the cycle, we have the menstrual phase, proliferative phase, and secretory phase. I'm not going to read the slide. I just described it on the diagram. So this is what happens during the ovarian, this is what we call reproductive cycle. It's two parts, ovarian and uterine. And they are synchronized together, and as you can see, they are under the effect of the pituitary and the hypothalamus. Now let's deal with the other part of the female genital organs or reproductive system, that's the vagina, and this is a passageway for birth, intercourse, and menstrual flow. It's about 10 centimeter in length, and it's a fibromuscular organ ending here at the cervix. As I said, the cervix projects into the vagina. So you can see this is a space here. There's a part of the vagina that surrounds the cervix, okay? Because the cervix projects into the vagina. Now the wall of the vagina here is formed of stratified squamous epithelium. It's protective, containing stratified squamous epithelium, more or less similar to the epithelium that lines the mouth, but it is non-keratinized. So it is not skin, it's stratified squamous epithelium, non-keratinized. These cells, they have a special ability to produce glycogen, and this glycogen is acted upon by non-harmful bacteria called lactobacilli, which are present in the vagina, and they produce lactic acid. This will increase the acidity of the vagina. We mentioned that previously, and this will act as a protection against harmful microorganisms like fungi or other harmful bacteria. So there are lactobacilli, which are non-harmful. They act on the glycogen which is produced by these cells, and they produce the lactic acid. And that's why the semen should be alkaline. And this alkalinity of the semen, we mentioned that last time, is contributed by the fluid that is produced by the seminal vesicles. It's highly alkaline to neutralize the acidity of the vagina. And then we have muscularis layer. There is muscularis layer here, and contains a lot of elastic fibers as well. But these muscles are smooth muscle fibers. But in addition, there are skeletal muscle fibers outside the wall of the vagina and might control the lumen of the vagina, but in the tube itself, the vaginal wall, is smooth muscle fibers. And then we have adventitia of loose connective tissue. These are the external female genital organs. The name that is used for them is the vulva. So the vulva is a collective name for the external genital organs. There's the mons pubis here, which has some fatty pad just underneath the skin. And then we have the labia majora and the labia minora. Labia minora, they surround the opening that is enclosed by the labia minora is called the vestibule. And it's therefore a common opening for the vagina and the external urethral meatus or external urethral meatus. The opening between the labia minora is called the vestibule. And then we have the clitoris, which is the counterpart of the penis. Again, it consists of an erectile tissue, like the erectile tissue that is present in the penis. Actually here, the labia majora and the labia majora are the counterparts of the scrotum, but testis does not descend into them. They do not develop into scrotum. They just remain there. And these labia minora, what happens in the female, and the male, sorry, what happens in the male is that during embryonic development, that the labia minora will close. They will be zipped up. And in this case, the urethral orifice will be brought forward close to the clitoris. The clitoris enlarged, forms the penis, and carries the urethra with it. But essentially, originally, the genital area is almost the same between male and female. That's why here the clitoris, which is the counterpart of the penis, does not contain the urethra, because there is no zipping up of the labia minora. And again, in the perineum, there are almost similar structures in one way or another to the ones that we described for the root of the penis. So we have masses of erectile tissue. This is called the bulb of the vestibule, because this opening, the common opening for the vagina and urethra, is called the vestibule. So this is the bulb of the vestibule. So we have two bulbs in the female. One bulb, if you go back to the male, you will find that there is one bulb of the penis. Here there are two bulbs of the vestibule. And again, there are crura for the clitoris. But of course, they are not as bulky and big as the ones that are present in the male. And again, they have some muscle fibers surrounding them, but they are not as bulky as those that are present in the male and serve the penis. Now, regarding the mammary glands, we have the mammary glands, or the breast. They are present in the skin. So they are in fact modified sweaty glands, and they are present in the skin. As you can see here, the breast tissue, or the tissue under the breast. Let's say I wouldn't say the breast tissue. The tissue under the breast is of two types here. It's mainly adipose tissue, fatty material. It's like the fat that is present everywhere else under the skin, in the hypodermis, which is mainly consisting of adipose tissue. So here we have a lot of fat and a small amount of glandular tissue. This is the glandular tissue, which you can see it here. It is in the form of multiple lobules. They have acini and then ducts. And these ducts will continue forwards, become larger and larger, and will form the lactiferous ducts, multiple lactiferous ducts. They open at the tip of the nipple. And before they open, there's an enlargement of the duct in the form of a sinus. So before they open into the tip of the nipple. So at the tip of the nipple, there are multiple ducts opening, actually. And the nipple is surrounded by darkened skin, which is called the areola. In this areola, there is multiple glands. These are sebaceous glands. Especially they enlarge during pregnancy and at the time of lactation. They are sebaceous glands. They are very important for the lubrication of the areola and the nipple, so that the nipple does not crack during lactation. They are called glands of Montgomery. Present in the areola. The areola also, this area of skin, contains some smooth muscle fibers. And these smooth muscle fibers are important for the erection of the nipple that takes place during lactation, during sexual arousal, in cold weather. So because specifically here under the skin of the areola, there are some smooth muscle fibers as well. As I said, or as you can see here in this diagram, that most of the tissue under the breast is made of fibrous tissue. So the size of the breast, in other words, does not reflect whether the woman can provide enough milk for her child or not, because even women with the smallest breast, they can produce enough milk for lactation. The size of the breast is mainly dependent here on the fatty tissue, not on the glandular tissue. Although during pregnancy there is an increase of glandular tissue as well as in the fatty tissue, which causes engorgement of the breast during pregnancy and during lactation, but the size of the breast has no relation at all to the function of the breast. In addition to that, probably, I don't know if it is clear here or not. Yeah, these are septa, partitions, which are called suspensory ligament of breast, or Cooper's ligaments. So these extend from the muscle, which is located under the breast or posterior to the breast. This is pectoralis major muscle, the muscle of the chest that produces the anterior fold of the axilla. And so this is connective tissue, partitions that extend from the muscle to the skin of the breast, and they are, as their name indicates, suspensory ligaments. They suspend the breast and produce its shape, and their effect definitely will be lost when you lie backwards, because they are tense only when you are standing. If these ligaments will be infiltrated by cancer cells, then they will shrink, and therefore this is the reason why like one of the, when you examine the breast, like even when you do self-examination, you have to make sure of these signs. One of the signs that might indicate that there is something wrong in the breast is that the presence of these dimples here, because infiltration of suspensory ligament will cause shrinkage of the suspensory ligament, so it will dimple the skin of the breast. In addition to that, these suspensory ligaments, which are attached to the skin when there is cancer of the breast, this will cause obstruction of the lymphatic network that is present just underneath the skin. So the drainage of the lymphatic network will not be as efficient as in the normal person, and because there are these suspensory ligaments attached to the skin, so the surface of the skin will be pitted like the orange peel. They call it, this sign is called peu d'orange, like orange peel it looks like. So this is another sign that there is a tumor inside the breast, and both of them are related to the presence of these suspensory ligaments. In old age, they will, because of increase and decrease in the size of breast during lactation, multiple pregnancies, these suspensory ligaments will become lax, and so it will cause sagging of the breasts. So these suspensory ligaments have a lot of functions to do. Now, in breast implantation, what they do is that they implant, they put the implant behind the breast, between the breast, because as I said, the breast is part of the skin. So they just put it behind the breast in front of pectoralis major muscle. Usually they use an incision below the breast so that the scar tissue will not appear. Sometimes the incision is around the areola or even in the axilla, and they will push the implant behind. Some people might have what we call supernumerary nipples or polylepia, and this is again because of embryology, and is also related to probably our ancestors. So like in many mammals, like in cats and dogs, they have multiple breasts along a line on the abdomen. And this is actually the situation that when we develop as embryos, we have what we call a breast line or a nipple line here, which extends from the thigh up into the axilla. And so multiple nipples are formed, and then they will degenerate during our development as humans. And so only one nipple on either side will remain. But if these nipples will not degenerate, you will have an accessory nipple. Sometimes even there's breast tissue associated with it. So an accessory breast. So you can find it everywhere. It is maybe present in males or in females, not necessarily in females. Sometimes it might look like a mole, not because it's not that well developed, but it's something normal, doesn't have any clinical significance, should not raise any attention. And here in this female, it is present in the axilla because this nipple line extends up into the axilla. Here it is located below the actual nipple in the male. This is what we call polylepia or supernumerary nipple. And this is the physiology of lactation. I think we have discussed that before when we dealt with the endocrine system, but I just want to refresh your memory that in lactation there are two processes. There is a production of milk and there is ejection of milk. And there are two hormones controlling these processes. Both of them are from the pituitary gland. So we have the prolactin from the anterior pituitary, which will stimulate the production of milk, and then we have the oxytocin from the posterior pituitary, which will cause the ejection of milk. And you remember what is the other hormone that is produced by the posterior pituitary apart from oxytocin? There are two hormones. Yes? Antidiuretic hormone. So antidiuretic hormone and the oxytocin are produced in the posterior pituitary. Actually, they are released in the posterior pituitary because they are actually produced in the hypothalamus, and the axons extend into the posterior pituitary to release them, both of them, into the blood. The first milk that is formed after delivery is called colostrum, and it's a cloudy fluid that is released before lactation, and this colostrum is very, very important. Even if the mother is not able to lactate at that time, she is very tired, they have to take this colostrum from her and give it to the newborn. This is very important, and then the true milk will be produced by the 4th day. If suckling stops, milk secretion will stop. Okay, questions? Okay, thank you.